Derick Jones, and I serve as your 2022 Chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Select Committee. I am pleased today that we will have our discussion, International Diversity and Cultural Norms and Cultural Intelligence Training. And I am pleased to have two of my esteemed colleagues join me today as panelists. First, we have Bruno Warren, who is the Head Research Management and Tech Transfer at PMU in Austria. Then we also have Beatrice Biney-Byamekye, who's the Research Development Officer at the University of Ghana. I would like to thank you both for being our esteemed panelists today, and I look forward to a very lively conversation regarding this topic. And as we all know, this is a very interesting topic because the world's gotten much smaller as a result of the pandemic. So we find ourselves now looking for collaborations globally. In fact, many funding agencies now are asking for a global component in order to be acceptable, fundable research. So today, thank you. If you would like to give an opening statement to our guests, introducing yourselves and your expertise that you bring to this topic. Let's start with Beatrice.
Thank you, Derick. I'm Beatrice Biney-Byamekye from University of Ghana. Today, I bring the African perspective to the table. I'm hoping to see how diversity plays out in collaborative research. Thank you.
Next slide, please. And Bruno, please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Derick. Thank you all. And thanks for the opportunity to bring in a bit of the international region flair to this talk and discussion today. I'm the immediate past chair of International Region 8, and together with Makram and Ellie, we are trying to move things forward that have been slightly challenging, to say the least, over the past 2.5 years, as you all know. And the Encura engagement on an international level is even more challenging with several time zones and not having face-to-face meetings once in a while at least. So we try to keep the community up and running and exchanging ideas and having spatial chats and so forth. So I'm more than happy to share a few ins and outs of that period and others as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Bruno. Well, we're going to start our conversation off today with understanding cultural diversity. As we know, as stated earlier, after the pandemic, we found the world a smaller place. Each of us were dealing with the same challenges or hurdles, but due to cultural diversity, not all of us address the same challenges the same. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So let's give a terminology for what cultural diversity is. The term culturally diverse is often used interchangeably with the concept of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is defined as a system of beliefs, behavior that recognizes and respects the presence, hold on, gotta minimize one thing here, presence of all diverse groups in an organization or society. Knowledge and values their socio-cultural differences and encourages and enables their continued contribution with an inclusive cultural context, which empowers all within the organization or society. That was a very, very powerful statement there. And Bruno, I want to start with you. How does cultural diversity play an important role in your role as a research administrator?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, how much time do we have? No, really, I think it's more often than not, we get so immersed in day-to-day operations and work and business and the things that come up in last minute, and we tend to forget that there is meaningful conversations out there that might just be able to overcome some of those difficulties which we wouldn't have had we thought about cultural diversity and different options, different opportunities, different viewpoints even. So it's a bit of almost like asking for, well, take a deep breath, exhale, take a step back, look at it, and maybe there's another solution for things that seem to be unsurmountable. And I'm just mentioning contracts and laws and export control and you name it. I mean, you're all in this field, no matter if we're called RMs or RAs, which is already defining differences. If you are a research manager or a research administrator, are you looking at it from the inside out, outside in, which is a very open innovation term in a sense, but it makes total sense to use it here, because looking at the diversity from an American standpoint, or looking at it from an African or a European or an Asia Pacific standpoint, makes already a difference. So it always depends from where you're looking onwards to what you're seeing and what is it that you see, and does that really make sense? So that extra minute or two to actually think about those aspects might just sometimes be helpful to actually literally overcome a cultural diversity by not having it because you thought about it ahead of time, just consciously.
Beatrice, same question.
Thank you for the question. I think cultural diversity is very important, especially in today's global research. But often we've given it a back view. We don't pay attention to it. And it's one of the things that really stuck up with me when I started this planning for this webinar, that we've often paid little attention to cultural diversity in our collaborative research, but it is something that should be highlighted. I'm hoping that by the end of this training, it will be one of the major takeaways we will take as research administrators or research managers. Thank you.
Very good. One of the things as a research administrator that I've noticed, especially dealing with international collaborations, is the lack of knowledge that I had as a research administrator on the cultural diversity of different regions of the world and how they do business. I was thinking from a US perspective, where the contract is everything. I send them the contract, they read and agree to the terms and conditions of the grant. And I'm thinking that we have a deal that's made and a deal that's in place and solid. But for some people, I've learned that the contract is just the formal start to the actual negotiating process. And that was because of the cultural diversity and the cultural way that these particular countries did business. I had no clue or understanding that I needed to understand not only how to interpret the language, but also how to interpret the business style and the cultural aspects of the people that we were engaging in contracts with. So I think understanding cultural diversity is a pivotal point for us in order to move forward in our research administration enterprise. Next slide, please. Culture. Let's talk about culture. Culture is that which shapes us. It shapes our identity and influence our behavior. Culture is our way of being. More specifically, it refers to the shared language, beliefs, values, norms, behaviors, and material objects that are passed down from one generation to the next. So culture. Culture is what defines us. I am a part of the American culture. I have an American cultural experience. Good, bad, or indifference, that is what I have been indoctrinated into, and that is what I know. But in order for me to work as a research administrator globally, I have to understand that my culture, although it wants to be dominant, it's not always the dominant culture where I'm doing business in. So Beatrice, what is your experience dealing with culture, especially from an African perspective, dealing with US people?
Thank you once again. Culture, we say, is our way of life. It's our language, the way we eat, the way we perceive gender, ethnicity, a whole lot of things. But one thing I've recognized is what really matters most to us in terms of culture differs from what really matters to Americans or to those in Europe. So culture, I would say, is very important to be considered in our research work. Thank you.
Bruno, I would like to hear that from you from a European Union perspective.
We get me started. Is it 27? Is it 28? Is it 29? Is it accession countries, non-accession, third countries, member states, the EFTA? It's it's not one thing either, and within each of those smaller or larger units of member states, you have many more broken down cultures that are breaking down into regions and even very small neighborhood areas. It's not one thing, and Europe is not one thing either. So we already grow up in an area. You drive half an hour and you are in 3 different states, and I mean different countries, not states as in the US. Well, where you have to drive for 6 hours to get to another state, which I've learned living in the Midwest. But you still have the opportunity to sleep in the same hotel chain, use the same currency, find the same restaurants, which you wouldn't when you drive for 10 hours in Europe or even in other parts of the world. So it's maybe a bit harsh to say it's ingrained in us, because I'm so used to it, and despite my young looks, I'm old enough to have 15 currencies in my pocket because I've been traveling in the summer, and I've been also helping US travelers and colleagues that we took around touring in my younger days, and we were at the border between Germany and the Netherlands, and the border said, if I want to make a phone call, I said, well, you need to use German marks on that side of the border, but if you walk across 50 yards, you need to use Dutch guilders or Belgian francs. And they looked at me like, but the phone booths are just next to each other. And this is very normal, because there is a border, even if you don't see it, and the European Union doesn't have a border anymore. There's Schengen rules and all of this. There is free floatage of people, of goods, and everything else. So we are so used to having this kind of automatic turn on of culture. When you go to Italy, you won't get food at 5 p.m. because the restaurants are not ready, because no one eats before 7 or 8. And if you go to Spain, you need to wait until 10. So you better have some tapas at 7 p.m. Otherwise you go hungry because the restaurants are not open. And that's a very basic, very easy to understand kind of, living culture. But then when it comes, as you mentioned, Derick, it comes to contracts, exactly what you said. In some countries, the written word is just there, and a handshake means everything, or whatever you've told that what's in the contract is golden, and the paper is not worth anything, because whatever's written down might have been perceived as, somebody made that up. And I'm thinking examples are the best way of doing this. Of course, you could underlay that, as Beatrice said, with a lot of cultural norms and everything, but the simple examples of everyday, basically picking up the phone, knowing, okay, I'm calling to Sweden, so this is the way they're doing it, or I'm calling to Italy to get colleagues to collaborate into a project, will be in a different way. So it almost like you turn on the switch and it's starting.
So question, do you think Americans who are involved in the contract process understand that culture dynamic? Or do you find yourself having to educate?
Well, if you get experience with it, it goes both ways. Like I said, inward, outward, even for the US or for Europe. If we go towards Asia, the same differences exist, and you expect, you do a money transfer, it might be quite difficult with all the SWIFT codes and big numbers and whatever. even more complicated a few years ago. But still, if the national bank of that country does not accept foreign transfers, you do have an international project going, but you can't transfer the money. So what are you going to do? So the contract is one thing, but what comes after the contract, and to understand that, now we have a contract with the European Union or the European Commission to execute an educational program or a higher education program, but we don't know how to involve our partners. You learn while you're on the go. And this is the same for the US, and we've heard in annual meetings and other conferences so many good experiences of Encura fellows that do work in that area and have learned, and all of their answers are, and all of the solutions always start with, once I traveled and my PR took me along to that country, I understood. And that's what it is. Travel does educate, and you see the world from a different perspective, and that makes the whole difference. You know, to experience that contracting outcome in the real world on the project life makes the whole difference. And you will learn afterwards. You will always take that step back, think, what does that contract mean? Where are they situated? What does it mean? Oh, that wouldn't work. Okay, we need to do it differently.
All right, let's talk about race and ethnicity. Race is defined as a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical traits. The term ethnicity is more broadly defined as large groups of people classed according to common racial, national, tribal, religious, linguistic, and cultural origin or background. So my question to both of you, starting with Beatrice, how does race and ethnicity play an important factor when you're looking to collaborate?
We pay no attention to race and ethnicity when we are looking for collaborators. Let's say it also depends. So I would rather rephrase it and say we pay almost no or little attention, because it also largely depends on where our funders are coming from. Sometimes we receive calls from America or Europe that wants a collaborator from, let's say, America or Europe. So in that case, we'll consider the origin of the person. Other than that, or the institution, other than that, it really plays little role in collaboration. But it is something that we do as even though the funder may not come out to say the person must be of a certain race, they usually say the PI or the co-PI must come from a certain region or block, and we consider that in our application. So it is not, sometimes not so deliberate that we'll go out for a PI or a co-PI because of his or her nationality or tribe or race. And one thing I must say is that in Africa, except let's say South Africa, or let me put it that in most parts of Africa, we make little reference to race. We talk more of ethnicity than race. So that is one major difference that I will want to bring out, that in Africa, we largely, most parts of Africa, especially when it comes to the western part of Africa where I belong, we likely talk of ethnicity rather than race, maybe because we are of the same color or of the same kind, physical appearance in some sort. So we pay little attention to race in that. We don't discriminate based on race. We may get people who may discriminate based on ethnicity, but not on race. Thank you.
I remember in one of our many conversations that we have, how you alluded to the fact that race was not a big factor, but ethnicity was, especially tribal ethnicity. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay, so let me take my country, Ghana. We have many ethnic groups, and there were, now due to education, things have changed. But in my younger years, there were areas you wouldn't go because a certain tribe lives there or are of dominant nature in that area. And there are certain collaborative work you will not encourage because of a certain tribe somebody comes from. I remember one experience where just when I had finished school, the boss I had said he is not comfortable working with a certain tribe. So you can see that tribe or ethnicity plays a major role in our environment more than race issues. So that is it.
Bruno, same question. How important is race and ethnicity from your part of the globe?
I've been threatening you would ask me that, because it's changing so rapidly, and it's almost I was gonna say it's getting better in all kinds of ways. But we even on what Beatrice mentioned on the tribal or the linguistic way of distinguishing people, that's you can have the same in different parts in Europe within the member states, that people perceive certain parts of a country as less attractive, or they are not as work ethically inclined and than other parts, or different geographical locations are being considered in a certain way. And it's the same as with spinach, because someone made a mistake some 100 years ago calculating the healthy factor of a spinach leaf. Everybody that grew up as a kid had to eat that green stuff because it was healthy. Well, it turned out it is not as much more healthier than anything else that you are putting in your mouth as a little kid. You can eat healthy stuff other ways. And that's the same with certain perceptions, as Beatrice said, of tribal ethnicity background that you have. And then you put that national thinking on it again. That's where it gets tricky at the moment, because I think the political situation is going the other way. And then you need to keep that into consideration. You can just block it out or think everything's fine and dandy. Political considerations and movements are going towards more nationalistic approaches. And you can see it all over the world. What's happening with people are trying, and societies are trying to keep that afloat, to have this society, this growth of societal understanding and well-being and living together with each other. But when you look at the news, you have the feeling this is exactly going the other way. And that's a very tricky thing to talk about it on one end and to come to a common understanding. But then you need to put cultural boundaries around it. Who are you talking to, and what are the tribes, or what are the ethnical groups that you talk to find that common understanding, or is it going completely the other way? So what I'm saying is, I could sit in my local restaurant or bar probably. If I go to the wrong table on the wrong day, I might just get a completely different picture of what's happening in the society than when you go to a different place, two houses down the road. And that's it's always the surrounding and the framework that you put everything in.
Awesome. Just from a U.S. perspective, race and ethnicity plays a huge role as how we operate as a society. It also can lead to inequities and opportunities. So my final question for you regarding this topic of race and ethnicity, let's look at from a clinical standpoint as far as patient and subject recruitment. Do you have to take that into consideration when recruiting subjects for your research studies?
Finally, yeah, yes, it's I would say that the history of medicine was based on us, Derick, you and me, as what kind of pills, what kind of treatment, what kind of whatever, and nobody thought about that different tribes, different ethnicities different societies have different needs. You know, tall people, little people, kids, you know, whatever gender, and it's now coming about. And this comes with the digital health wave, I would say, that's coming, because that digital health initiative and innovation in all of those area aspects makes it possible to have precision medicine. And what used to be a rare disease turns out to be not such a rare disease, but there's many, many, many more so-called rare diseases that are not. And working in a medical university, I see that day out, day in and day out, what researchers are trying and what the clinicians are trying to see and respond to so there's a trade-off between both of them to get to this new way of drug delivery and perception of how to set up clinical trials and how to get the right patients and how to get the this precision medicine in the right way. So, but nevertheless, a long ways to go, but it's speeding up, I would say.
Right. Being that I work in genomics, and also I have a division of my institute that deals with rare diseases as well as common diseases, it's important from a clinical standpoint to have access to patient populations globally, because what you just explained, you know, what might be rare to us might be something common that another ethnicity has been dealing with for centuries. So having access and understanding of how to collaborate globally and make those contacts and overcome the cultural and ethnic hurdles that we might encounter by understanding and communicating with each other. And really,
and if I may add, it's a very important point for us RMs and RAs, because immediately all the alarm bells are going off with everyone listening, because it's data and it's sharing of data and it's collection of data, and where do you have the repository and how do you get it across a country boundary, and how do you profit from this? So the set thinking of I just call it export control is a hindering factor left and right in exactly those points that you just mentioned. And we need to come to an understanding that whatever norms and boundaries were nice and good did have a different framework around it. But as soon as you put precision medicine and this, you know, different patient structures and ethnicity into it, those norms don't work anymore. And we're coming towards a global understanding. But now let me ask you the question, Derick, how many years will that take to change that?
Well, you know, that is a good question, but what we can do is demystify the hurdle and the challenges that are associated with that by doing what we're doing now, having open, honest, and free dialogue regarding the subject in order to educate and empower our community to do better and to know and to want better in order to serve our patient populations. Right now we have a poll. Let's go to our first poll question for our attendees. And the first poll question is, how mindful are you of the role, how mindful are you of the role of cultural diversity plays as it relates to the collaborations? First answer is always, not at all, or sometimes. So we'll give you a minute to take the poll. In the meantime, Beatrice, same question to you that Bruno and I just elaborated on. What is your take on that?
What I want to say is it depends on the subject under investigation. So assuming the subject under investigation happens to a particular ethnic group, then I know my scientists or our faculty will consider ethnicity. But if it is the subject under investigation is something that does not differ on ethnic grounds, it is not something that it will be taken into consideration.
All right, we should be closing our poll now and see what our results are. I'm interested in knowing. So 34% of you said always, and not at all, 6%, and somewhat, 60%. I like the fact that most of you are aware that you have to be mindful of the cultural diversity that it relates. All right, next slide. Thank you for that poll response. Very informative. Now let's talk about the art of communication. Bruno and I had an interesting conversation earlier today about even just the term diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you said from your perspective, what do you call it, Bruno?
What equity for me, the first thing I think about is stock options, capital, and those kind of things. Because in our area we call it equality, and I always have a hard time also remembering what it stands for, because we use equality and not equity. So I was wondering if this makes a whole difference of how you perceive that value of that
Well, looking at it from
equity
a
or
definition,
equality.
I would find them both equitable in usage. For example, to me, it's no different than the United States. We call ourselves research administrators, but in most parts of the world, you're a research manager. Two separate terms, but they have the same definition that describes the same functionality. But it's
But does it really?
You know, that's
Because
a good question. From
when you, I was always amazed when I went to the different events, and you think about it from what we do. Do we manage grants? Do we manage PIs? Do we manage different funders and opportunities, or do we just merely administer? So is the connotation of you are just an administrator, is that not a racial thing to say? Honestly, I'm being very provocative here, but then if you actually look at it as you're managing my grant, you see what I'm trying to say? Does that not put something into it if you are managing stuff instead of administering?
I think that is a very interesting topic and discussion, and maybe we should all be sitting with invite our human resources professionals to figure out that debate. But what it did is, though, is the art of communication. You can have two different terms that mean exactly the same thing for what we're doing, but for different parts of the globe, it might have a different meaning or different connotation. But one of the things that we as research administrators need to do is understand how language and the art of communication is so important. One of my favorite phrases that I picked up as a child from my daddy is that is to be peacock proud and honeymoon happy. That might absolutely mean nothing. I have an understanding for anybody outside of the southern region of the United States. But for some cultures, that might have been an offensive term. How do I know? Unless I take the time to understand how do people communicate in different parts of the world. So next slide, please. And we're going to watch a short video that really brings into play this part of our discussion. That was an interesting video that was packed with a lot of information. And before we dive into it, let's first take a look at our next poll question, which was the answer that was posed to you in the video. What could you do to avoid cultural miscommunications in the workplace? Number one, study the cultural norms of places you're doing business, or understand nonverbal communication, practice mindfulness and respect for cultural differences, or all of the above. Let's take a minute to take our poll while we open up the discussion, starting with Bruno with the first question. One of the things that was brought out in the video that I thought was so impactful is understanding the difference between high context versus low context communication. And I really think that as from an American's perspective, this is where we typically miss the mark. It's not understanding how invaluable and important a tool that communication is when we're dealing with our foreign subawardees, our collaborators. from your perspective, from your experience, how important is understanding high context versus low context communication? Which high context is being more honor based, where low context is more individualistic between a recipient and a sender and a receiver of information. Wow. Very good. 98% of you understood the assignment. All of it is very important in order to avoid the miscommunication. So Bruno, back to you. Question. How important is it for you as a research administrator to understand the importance of low context versus high context communication?
I'd say the important part is to have this this mix and match, and it's a bit of both. And I think that comes with experience, very much so. I think I screwed up many more times in younger days when you just go in with what you know, and you just expect it to be the same, on the other side, geographically, gender, topics, content, whatever, and you learn with travel and with experiences that's not the case. So I think it's important, and the more you can learn from your peers or from experience or from others that actually are willing to share and point out that you're running into the wrong direction, I think this is the quintessential answer I would give to this.
Beatrice, not only are you representing our African colleagues today, but you're also a woman. How does communication play a role, or how communication is perceived from a female perspective globally?
Females, we always say we like to communicate, or let me put it that way, we like to talk, if that is a better put. So I think females communicate well in dealing with people. But whilst Bruno was speaking, I think what I gathered was the fact that truly we all, when you are starting with the profession, you learn from the individualistic point of view. That is how you communicate. But as you grow and you mature in the work, you realize that you have to take other factors into consideration, or you don't only speak from your opinion, but you have to take your collaborators' perspective also into consideration. So that is what I would say about the communication. As for gender views on communication, generally we say women would like to talk, women would like to express themselves more, unlike men who are succinct. Men speak few, they speak few words. So that's what I would say about it.
So one of the things too that we also want to look at, especially when you talk about gender as it relates to communication, there are some countries where women are not as, don't have as what Americans would refer to equality in roles. Therefore, there is cultural conditions within those countries and industries that have women in a certain position. When we deal globally from a US perspective, and that's where you also get differences in gender. For example, our last webinar series dealt with trans in the workplace. But you have to look at it from a global perspective, is how welcoming are receiving in the communication aspect are other cultures, due to cultural norms, would be to actually entering into a collaborative effort with someone who has presented themselves from our aspect as being non-gender binary or of trans experience. Bruno.
Yep, I can just subscribe to that, because in some areas you just can't bring it up, or you can't even have this as a topic, and it would just not be an issue, because it will not reach the surface of a safe discussion or
Mhm.
even a conversation.
So you really have to make sure that you understand the cultures and the climate of the cultures in which you're doing business with in order to make sure that you secure the collaboration. Now, perception is everything.
Let me add.
Yes, please.
I want to add something. I think in my environment, gender and communication, it varies. Whether it's also diverse. Let me put it that way. Whether you are taking gender and communication at the workplace or at the household level. So if it is at the workplace level, you don't discriminate based on gender. Assuming there's a topic to be discussed, we rarely discriminate based on gender. We don't say because you are a woman, you are not supposed to speak, or because you're a man, you are supposed to speak a lot. That is different. But when you go to the household level in the house, a woman that, especially if you are living with a husband and somebody visits the house, culturally, it is very respectful that you allow the man who we assume is the head of the family to speak rather than the woman. So it's diverse, or it differs depending on the environment that we find ourselves. Assuming we are talking about gender and communication in the workplace, which I assume that is what we are talking about. We don't discriminate based on your gender, especially if I'm speaking for the Ghanaian community. But if you go to the household level, the family level, there's a little bit of gender bias when you are talking about gender and communication at the household level.
Very good. Now I'm going to pose a question that's going to preview our next webinar series. And let's talk about age, because age is a very important factor, especially when you look at it from the context of high context communication versus low volume communication. The video alluded to the fact that in Asian cultures, age is very important. It's a respect. Whereas in some cultures, we try to age out our older population. So how do you look at it from an age perspective when it deals with dealing with global communication? Bruno.
Thank you. I think this is a really good topic, and I'm happy I saw that you bring it up in the next webinar as a whole topic, because again, you have to take it into a framework, or into a whatever you want to call it scientifically, into a hypothesis or whatever, because maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was not so much of an issue, because all the companies were, at least in our in our area, were trying to reduce the workforce of elderly workers and employees, because they were considered too expensive, and you tried to refreshen the workforce and to get them into early retirement. Whereas nowadays, when you look at the population level, with the generation, whatever it's called, set and whatever it's now, the boomers, the baby boomers have stopped, and they are now stopping their work almost. So there's a huge gap in the population who went to school at certain times, 30, 40 years ago, who went to the workforce, and suddenly there's a lack of employment, and there's also a lack of knowledge workers and knowledge employees that can give on their experiences. And suddenly I see that this is changing a little bit, and also it's changing because of the last 2 years. That has given another boost to that, because suddenly it didn't matter much, about your mobility, but it mattered if you were able to adapt to this work environment. And with knowledge and with experience comes, in our RM and RA environment, comes network connectivities and knowing people, having members, knowing who to call. So suddenly that age factor is turning into a positive one.
So let's move on in our presentation. On the screen, you see some terms here. You have political climate, tribal disputes, ethnic cleansing, wars, territorial disputes, religious disputes, and civil unrest. Next slide, please. All of this leads to politics and cultural diversity. And the key is, as a research administrator, we have to be mindful that, can you go back a slide, please? Thank you. We have to be mindful that politics actually plays a huge role in our ability to collaborate. One of the main things that you have to look at is the cultural climate of where you're going and where you're proposing to do business, and is it safe enough? And I just want to pose the question to both of you, freestyle question, is when you look to collaborate, does the politics of the day, and especially where you currently reside in Austria, your next door neighbor is Ukraine. So how important is the politics in as it relates to cultural diversity important to you when it comes to collaborations?
It's amazing to see that development since February. Really, I think it's almost racing in the political agenda. It's a race where the virus and the pandemic already shaped up things rather quickly. This is going. I mean, this is light speed almost in who you can do contracts with, or which contracts are certainly under discussion, or which things are possible suddenly and which ones are stopped. Running projects are being opened up with extra funding to involve Ukrainian scientists. Medical professions, our medical school is opening up to include Ukrainian medical students that had to interrupt their studies because, well, a rocket fell into the hospital and they can't continue. And they were like 3 months before finishing their degree and their professional experience. And this is just one of them. Look at the statements of states, how quickly they change as something that would have been considered in not being a matter of discussion, and suddenly Nordic countries are joining NATO, and this is going in 2 months. This is changing. So what we talked before about, how to get data across and export controls and certain norms and frameworks, it's the frameworks that are changing, and it seems those frameworks are changing more quicker than before.
Beatrice, from your perspective.
I think politics play a major role in where we conduct our research, because where, let's say there's unrest, our science wouldn't encourage our scientists to go there and conduct research there. We also look at if there's any disputes, it is something that we will not encourage our scientists to go and conduct research there. The truth of the matter is, where the environment is relatively calm, we do not really pay detailed attention to that. So let's say that, assuming there was no war in Ukraine, where everybody knows that there's a war in Ukraine, and was on a silent, maybe their leader is not treating them well, it is not something we would have considered. So where there's no knowing, we don't deliberately go out to say that let's look at the political climate before we conduct our research or we collaborate with them. But where there is obvious reasons, political unrest, where everybody knows that there's political unrest, there is religious disputes, we wouldn't. It is something we will consider before we collaborate.
Derick, can I have a short? I know we are short in time, but still, I would like to have a small mention on that I forgot the word, not the microscope, the thing on the PowerPoint that's pointing out, that's bringing out the people in the what is it called? I can't. I lost the word. What's that?
It's a magnifying.
Thank you. The magnifying glass that shows people of different ethnicities and whatnot. This should actually be in the middle, in the center, because politics usually screw up that cultural diversity. Because if you put the politics out of that slide and you would just show it without anyone telling what that means, it would actually have a very positive connotation to what's happening when you put this magnifying glass on countries like that are now having an issue with another country. It's not the majority of the people that are screwed up. I'm sorry. It's the political agenda that is screwed up. So that magnifying glass should be in the center. And as soon as we put the word politics away, we'd have a completely different conversation. And a very meaningful and a very positive. Unfortunately, we can't do that.
True. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to the cultural intelligence aspect of our discussion. And cultural intelligence is defined as the ability to function effectively in cultural diverse settings. And that's having an understanding and knowledge that although we are from the same species of mankind, we're all human beings, we have different life events and experiences that shape us as an individual and as a culture and an ethnic group or a race of people. So let's look at it from these four aspects. Drive. Drive can be defined as how can I adapt, strategy, how can I plan, awareness, metacognition, planning, checking. And let's look at knowledge. How is this similar to my other experiences? So, Bruno referred to that earlier, is that as you grow in communication, your experience as a communicator will allow you to enhance and grow. Behavior and action. How do I behave? Speech, acts, verbal, nonverbal behaviors. And we just saw that from the previous video and in our discussion. How you communicate and your actions in communications are very important in order to make sure that you're successful with international collaborations. Let's look at our next video. Video was packed with a lot of information that's going to lead off our next session, which is discussing the challenges and solutions that we need in order to make sure that we use our cultural intelligence in order to make sure that we are actually benefiting the research. So one of the things that he talked about that I find very interesting is drive. One of the reasons that we're even having this discussion is because I'm utilizing my drive to understand the difference in cultural, how to communicate. How can I better understand as a research administrator how I can make the collaboration work by having a vested interest and a relationship with my peers globally in order to make the research work. For example, I'm an NCORA fellow. I was a fellow for 2020, but due to the pandemic, I have yet to actually go to my fellowship location, which is with Beatrice at the University of Ghana. But what we have done is that over the course of the year in planning for me to go to the fellowship, we have developed a relationship, which our goal is to lead to collaboration between our institutions. Why? Because we took the time to understand and how to communicate and how to share our shared knowledge base to demystify the hurdles that we would have as far as doing research together. So, Beatrice, question for you. How important is drive?
It is very important. It helps you to do the unthinkable, what you never thought of. If the drive is there, you are able to go beyond what your capacity can do. So I think drive is very, very important. Very, very important.
Strategy. the video talked about being mindful of how you formulate an email. It's just to that level that we have to have an understanding that the importance of cultural intelligence. So Bruno, if you're dealing with a collaborator halfway on the other side of the world, you've done your due diligence in order to understand the culture and how they communicate. How important is it you to make sure that you structure and frame your emails correctly in order to make sure that your communication is not misinterpreted?
Same answer as Beatrice. I call it the mirror image. So it's not what you're writing, it's what's arriving at the other end, and who you're sending this to. And that's probably two of the few things, if nothing else, that matters. And a very short example to that, with collaborations that we had with several partners from different countries. Very good. Those were the days where you could actually meet for project development. Very good, very informative, very active 1 or 2 days of meetings to actually decide what's happening, deliverables, milestones, whatnot. You get home, and then a few weeks later, some deliverable deadline might come up, and you would receive an email, and you're thinking it's a different person writing this email. And I could not understand, and it was totally aggravated. And I'm like, oh, this is not possible. How could that be? And there's plenty of time. We can all get this all done. Until I picked up the phone and called, and there was times where WhatsApp did not exist yet. I made a phone call. I said, so what's up? What's with this email? And she said, oh, just forget it. I need to send it like this to my people, so the same ethnicity, because if I don't do that, they would never respond. So that email stirred quite some differences in all the other partners email accounts, except for those that it was intended to. So the email was made equal to everyone, but it had different outcomes. So trying to make everyone equal and send one email sometimes doesn't really work. So the mirror of who you are sending it to and what it's supposed to do, I think, is very important.
So that goes back to understanding the difference between low volume or high volume communication with the context, correct?
Absolutely.
Very good. You also brought up something that I found very interesting that I want you to expand on, is that you said you use WhatsApp, which is an encrypted application that most of us who have international friends use for communication because it's free. How important is it deciding, and Zoom has made the world a much smaller place, and so has WebEx, and I believe that's what we're using for this session. How is using technology important in order to lessen the burden with global communication? Beatrice.
I think in recent times, especially in the COVID time, we've all come to realize the importance of technology in communication. It's made people just a click away, and I think it is very, very important, and it is playing a very pivotal role in our communication.
I love the fact that you're sitting in Accra, Ghana.
Yes.
Bruno
yes.
is in Austria. I'm in Los Angeles, California today in my home office. But yet we're in three different parts of the world, but we're able to communicate and to share our expertise together due to technology. And it goes to show you how much smaller that the world is as a result of the use of technology. So let's also look at knowledge. Each of us are here is because we have had experiences and knowledge that has helped us in order to navigate the hurdles of international collaborations by using our cultural intelligence, understanding how to communicate, looking at understanding cultural diversities, breaking down the barriers that are caused by gender, race, ethnicity, knowledge. How important is your knowledge base? And you've hinted at that several times today, Bruno.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key issues here. I mean, there's 4 points in all of this, but I think the knowledge part is the key that everything is hanging on to. You know why? Because you can't give in. Once you've got the knowledge, there's no way back. And the point is, how do you convey the message, and how do you convey, and how do you share, and how do you make that knowledge transfer, and how do you make it sustainable? And this is when the pain really comes in getting this this intercultural communication and the intelligence part into this, to make intelligent conversations that are meaningful with the topic on behind it. So again, that framing. And I find it almost like the drive to keep that knowledge going and to not let go, even though it's a pain and it's difficult, because you need to, sometimes you have to feel like an educator to actually, you know, make people aware that there is another world out there, and there's another way to send emails, and there's another way to address someone, and there's maybe another way than just the contract to get things moving, and you can't give in. And that's really, that's the drive to keep that knowledge afloat, I think.
Right. And behavior. The behavior is so important for me, is because I have to be so intentional as to how I go about understanding the culture, the climate, the temperature of an organization. I'll research to see what is the structure of an organization. One of the main questions I'm always going to ask is, what's your infrastructure capacity? And then I look at it from I'm very intentional understanding and working with my team to see what are the challenges and the hurdles that we're going to have in order to make sure that we implement our drive, strategy, knowledge, and mold that into a behavior that's going to benefit the science. So all of these things of cultural intelligence all work together to make sure that we take that model and these 4 different aspects of it in order to make sure that we have our collaboration. I think we have another video. This video is because most of our institutions and funding agencies are regulatory driven. But we as research administrators have to understand that, yes, our job is to also make sure that the rules and regulations are followed, but having the understanding of how to use our cultural intelligence and knowing how to communicate verbally and non-verbally, and understanding the climate and the culture of where we're doing business in, is ultimately what's going to help make a collaboration successful. And it'll also help you to make sure that you're translating the regulatory rules and regulations successfully to those who are not governed by them. And I think that was important for us to put in there for this training session, is to understand that, yes, regulatory is everything, but when it's coupled with your cultural and intelligence and your understanding of how to do business globally, makes the absolute difference in being successful with your collaborations. So I'm going to give each of you 2 minutes to also add your feedback as to why partnering those 2 together are successful. 2 minutes, Beatrice.
Thank you. I think we've all come to realize that embedded in collaborative research is cultural intelligence. To be able to be successful in that, we have to be culturally intelligent, and we should not just look at our usual business, that is the administrative work of the administrative management of the research, but we should look beyond it and pay more attention to where our collaborators are coming from. I think that is what I have for now. Thank you.
All right, Bruno.
I would say well said, Beatrice, really. I mean, we should give the floor to the audience if they have questions, really.
Yes, and that is our next segment, is to open up the floor to our participants in this discussion for Q&A. So feel free to go into the chat and write a question, and we'll take it from there. In the meantime, I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of the Select Committee on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion to thank our two esteemed guest panelists, Beatrice and Bruno. Your knowledge and your expertise in sharing that, which goes back to cultural intelligence with knowledge, has been immense, and I greatly appreciate your participation. I've learned a lot, and I have grown as a result of it, which also increased my knowledge. So thank you for sharing with us today. So let's see if we have any questions. We have one question that has come in, and the question is how do you overcome the hurdle and challenges associated with getting out of oneself to make a collaboration work? And for me, to answer that question, it goes back to the cultural intelligence piece where you focus on drive. What is your motivating factor to why you're doing what it's doing? It can't be just to get a paycheck, but you're doing something that's bigger for humanity. Our job is to promote science and research globally. And how do we do that? It's not only up to our investigators to go get collaborators, but it's up to us to maintain the collaborative relationship. We are people that develop relationships. And thank God for places like Ancora, where I have the opportunity to interact and to grow professionally by collaborating with my esteemed Region 8 partners. Thank you yet again for being participants in this session.